Welcome to the Human Archive. If you enjoy original science fiction stories about humanity finding its place among the stars, subscribe and join us for the next one. Now, let's begin. Chapter 1. Contraband in a Mug. Caldrex Umon had spent 32 years preventing people from dying, because someone else insisted a harmless homeworld delicacy was just food. He had seen a ceremonial fruit send a delegation into respiratory collapse. He had seen a fermented sauce trigger seizures in a visiting trade minister. The incident had changed how Caldrex approached hospitality law. The host species had considered the sauce mild enough for children. The visiting minister's species metabolized one of its common compounds into something that disrupted motor control within minutes. Nobody had been reckless by their own biological standards. That was precisely why Caldrex never treated food as merely cultural. Once, early in his career, he watched a well-meaning ambassador nearly kill 6 people with dessert. So when the Federation Assembly safety scanner chirped a Category 4 xenobiological alert inside a diplomatic corridor, Caldrex did not hesitate. He followed the signal. The source was a ceramic mug. The mug was in the hand of Ambassador Caroline Pendergast of Earth. She was standing outside Committee Chamber 7, reading a briefing tablet while vapor rose from the dark liquid. Caldrex stopped 3 steps away. Place the container on the table. Caroline looked up. Excuse me. The container? She glanced at the mug. My coffee. Yes. Why? Because your coffee is emitting a prohibited methylxanthine signature. Caroline stared at him for half a second. Then she smiled. Caldrex had learned to distrust human smiles immediately. You're joking. I am not. The smile disappeared. Caldrex activated Controlled Substance Protocol. 2 hazard officers arrived wearing sealed gloves and portable containment gear. The hazard response attracted attention. Diplomats slowed. Aides whispered. Caroline watched one officer place a transparent isolation field around her mug. This is coffee, she said. That does not improve the situation. It actually improves most situations. Caldrex ignored that. The analysis completed. He read the molecular profile, then read it again. The translation system supplied the human common name, caffeine. Caldrex felt his throat tighten. The substance had been outlawed throughout Federation space long before humanity developed interstellar travel. He looked at Caroline. How much of this did you consume? She gave him an approximate quantity. He checked the estimated dose. Then he checked the translation interface. How much? Caroline repeated herself. Caldrex looked at the mug. Then he looked at her. You are conscious. So far, your cardiac rhythm is stable. I would hope so. You ingested this voluntarily. Caroline's eyebrows rose. Yes. Why? She looked genuinely confused. Because it's morning. The answer was so inadequate that Caldrex requested immediate xenomedical consultation. Dr. Aisha Torbett arrived 8 minutes later carrying a medical kit and the expression of a human who had already been warned what the problem was. She looked at the containment field around the mug. Then she looked at Caldrex. Then she looked at Caroline. You triggered hazmat over coffee. Caldrex stiffened. That substance is a Category 4 neural stimulant. Aisha's expression changed, not to amusement but to professional attention. Oh. Caroline glanced at her. Oh. Aisha ignored her. What species are most sensitive? Several major clades. Some experience severe cardiac excitation at doses below what she just consumed. Caroline's face lost its irritation. Aisha nodded slowly. All right. Then we need handling rules. Caldrex had expected resistance. He did not get it. Within 15 minutes, the human delegation agreed to sealed brewing equipment, restricted preparation zones, separate waste capture, warning labels, and explicit prohibition against offering caffeinated beverages to non-humans without medical clearance. Their immediate cooperation reassured him. Caldrex had expected the usual argument from newly contacted species. Our bodies can handle it, therefore the rule is foolish. The humans made the opposite distinction. Their bodies could handle it, but that did not make the substance safe around everyone else. Within minutes, Aisha had turned a diplomatic irritation into a containment protocol. What followed was more disturbing. Aisha requested that Caroline be permitted to finish the cup. Chapter 2. Category 4. Caldrex refused. Aisha appealed medically, not emotionally. Ambassador Pendergast is a habitual caffeine user, she explained. Abrupt withdrawal during a high-stakes summit is not ideal. You are describing dependence. Habitual use can produce dependence, yes. Caroline, seated nearby, muttered, "This is becoming a very judgmental morning." Aisha ignored her. Caldrex reviewed the relevant human medical records. He did not like what he found. Caffeine tolerance varied widely among humans. So did metabolism. Too much could cause tremor, anxiety, elevated heart rate, insomnia, gastrointestinal distress, and dangerous cardiac effects in susceptible individuals. It was not harmless. Good. At least human biology obeyed some rules. What disturbed him was how ordinary the substance seemed in human culture. The Federation archives treated methylxanthines as a history of emergency rooms, military abuse, and prohibition. Human records treated the same family of compounds as breakfast, hospitality, work culture, headache medicine, sports nutrition, and bad decisions made during examinations. Caldrex kept expecting to find the point where humanity had collectively recognized the danger and stopped. Instead, he found dosage guidelines. Humans consumed caffeine in coffee, tea, chocolate, energy beverages, tablets, medicines, and foods. Caldrex pulled up historical Federation records and showed Caroline why the ban existed. One species had used methylxanthine analogs to extend battlefield wakefulness until soldiers began dying from cardiac overstimulation. Another had built a prestige culture around chemically suppressing sleep. Social status came to depend on remaining awake longer than rivals. The result had been an epidemic of neurological injury and metabolic collapse. Several governments eventually banned the compounds independently. The Federation later standardized the prohibition. Caroline stopped joking. These doses were that dangerous. For them, yes. She studied the old medical images. That's awful. Caldrex watched her carefully. There was no mockery and no human comment about aliens being fragile. She simply accepted that the same molecule affected different bodies differently. Aisha did the same. If coffee waste is dangerous, we'll treat it as hazardous material outside our secured area. Caldrex nodded. We will also require packaging. Fine. Storage authorization. Fine. Dedicated disposal. Fine. And no distribution to Federation personnel. Caroline looked offended. I don't share good coffee casually anyway. Aisha closed her eyes. Caldrex decided that was probably a joke. He looked at the sealed mug. One question remains. Caroline folded her hands. Only one. Why knowingly ingest a controlled neural stimulant? Caroline answered with perfect seriousness. It's coffee. Caldrex stared at her. That explains nothing. Chapter 3. You drink the poison? Aisha explained caffeine pharmacology in a private medical room. Caldrex listened closely. Humans accumulated sleep pressure partly through adenosine signaling. Caffeine interfered with some of that signaling, reducing perceived sleepiness and improving alertness for a time. Caldrex summarized. You chemically obstruct the body's fatigue warning. Aisha tilted her head. That's oversimplified. Is it wrong? Not entirely. Caldrex found that answer appalling. So the body requires rest, but the chemical makes the brain less interested in that requirement. Temporarily. Why? Sometimes being tired at the wrong moment is inconvenient. Inconvenient? Aisha looked toward Caroline, who was reviewing summit notes with a confiscated mug still visible behind containment. Humans drive vehicles, work night shifts, respond to emergencies, study, travel across time zones, perform surgery. Fight fires. Sleep deprivation impairs all of those activities. Yes. Then sleep. Whenever possible. Caldrex waited. Aisha continued. When it isn't possible, we manage the problem. The word interested him. Manage, not solve. Humans did not appear to believe caffeine erased fatigue. They used it anyway. Caldrex reviewed human consumption customs. The database made him increasingly uncomfortable. Coffee before work, tea during meetings, coffee during overnight labor, caffeine during long transport. Tea during social visits, coffee during negotiations, coffee during grief, coffee during celebrations, coffee because it was morning, coffee because it was afternoon, Coffee because a human had already consumed too much coffee and now needed to remain awake long enough to regret it. He looked at Caroline. You built social rituals around a controlled neural stimulant. Caroline finally had her mug back, now covered in hazard labels. She lifted it. We built social rituals around hot water. The stimulant was a bonus. Caldrex did not know whether to record that sentence. Aisha did. Then the assembly warning tone sounded. The final summit on the Helix Corridor Accord was beginning. Caldrex expected to return to his office once the caffeine handling order was complete. Instead, Federation safety administrators attached him to the human delegation for the duration of the summit. Someone had to ensure that the humans did not accidentally poison half the assembly. Caldrex considered the assignment beneath his experience. By the end of the first day, he would have preferred a toxicological emergency. Chapter 4. The Treaty Earth could not stop. The Helix Corridor Accord looked reasonable if one read only the summary. Piracy had increased across 19 smaller systems. Cargo insurance costs were rising. 2 civilian convoys had been attacked. The Triune Imperial Bloc proposed a solution: shared anti-piracy patrols, standardized tariffs, joint navigation enforcement, military protection of major trade routes. The details were less benign. The 3 empires would gain permanent basing rights. Their inspectors could stop civilian traffic. Their enforcement fleets would operate near several human colonies. Smaller systems would lose control over important transit revenue. Earth's outer trade route would become subject to imperial fees. Caldrex did not consider the treaty illegal. That distinction mattered because Bragath was good at what he did. He was not forcing 19 smaller systems at gunpoint. He was using piracy, insurance pressure, and the cost of fragmented patrols to make imperial administration look like the cheapest available answer. Several neutral governments genuinely preferred parts of the proposal. Earth could not win by pretending every imperial argument was false. He considered it imperial. The distinction mattered in Federation law. Chancellor Bragath Loom understood that perfectly. He represented the Triune Bloc with the calm confidence of someone who had counted the votes before entering the room. He was not a loud negotiator. He did not threaten. He did not need to. When Earth objected to permanent military access, Bragath answered with piracy statistics. When smaller systems complained about fees, he produced cost-sharing models. When one delegation questioned enforcement authority, he pointed to recent convoy losses. He had an answer for everything. Caroline took handwritten notes. Caldrex found the handwriting odd because every word in the chamber was already being transcribed automatically. She wrote anyway. She wrote names, promises, numbers, arrows between statements, and small marks in the margins. Her objections failed. Caroline did not react theatrically. She crossed out arguments that had been answered, marked clauses that had improved, and moved on. Caldrex noticed that she seemed almost pleased when Bragath resolved a legitimate concern. She was not trying to prove the treaty evil. She was trying to discover whether it was safe to live under. The vote count did not move. By late afternoon, ratification looked inevitable. Caroline requested the procedural archive. Bragath noticed. So Earth intends to delay. Caroline looked up. Earth intends to read. Bragath smiled politely. Of course. Caldrex recognized the expression. He expected her to find nothing useful. So did everyone else. The emergency summit rules were old, dense, and rarely important. Caroline read for hours, then she stopped. Her finger rested on one section, the continuous material objection hearing. Caldrex knew the rule. It existed to prevent powerful states from rushing treaties through before directly affected governments could present material evidence. It was almost never used. The objecting principle had to remain continuously available to the chamber. Technical teams could rotate. The principal could take limited medical recesses. If the principal withdrew without an approved successor, the objection closed. Most hearings ended quickly. The longest in Federation history had lasted 19 hours. Caroline read the rule again, then she looked at Aisha. How ugly would 4 days be? Aisha stared. For you. Yes. Very. Caroline closed the archive. Good. I only need ugly. For the first time that day, Caldrex forgot about the coffee. Chapter 5. 1 cup in a clause. Caroline invoked continuous review 37 minutes before the final vote. The chamber reacted as if someone had discharged a weapon. Bragath objected immediately. The Assembly Legal Authority reviewed Earth's filing. Caldrex watched the result appear. The ruling confirmed valid standing, recognized the material objection, and suspended ratification. Bragath's expression did not change. "Very well," he said. "We resolve the objection." The first issue involved military inspection authority near human colonies. Bragath expected 2 hours. It took 6. Caroline did not waste time. Her restraint surprised Caldrex. She asked real questions. If an Imperial patrol misidentified a human civilian ship which government held liability, could inspectors seize cargo without local warrants, which command authority controlled mixed enforcement fleets? If one empire ordered pursuit and another ordered disengagement, whose command took precedence? Bragath answered carefully. Several human concerns were resolved. One inspection clause was narrowed. A liability provision was clarified. The treaty improved. Caldrex expected Caroline to close the objection. Instead, she turned one clarified answer into another legitimate question. If Imperial forces shared emergency authority, how did that interact with local rescue command? Bragath answered. That answer revealed a tariff exemption for military support vessels. Caroline asked how those exemptions would be calculated. Hours passed. At local midnight, Bragath leaned back. His species slept in long, consolidated neurological cycles. Most of the Imperial delegation did. He looked toward Caroline with the expression of a patient hunter. "You have made your record, Ambassador. Shall we reconvene after sleep?" Caroline reached for her sealed mug. The hazard symbols were bright enough to be visible from across the chamber. Caldrex watched her drink. The most prohibited stimulant in the Federation disappeared into a human diplomat as casually as water. Bragath's smile faded by a fraction. Caroline opened another page of notes. "No," she said, "let's keep going." Only then did Caldrex understand that the caffeine incident had not ended. It had changed departments. Chapter 6. First Night. The first night was almost entertaining. It stopped feeling like a stunt because Caroline never filled the chamber with nonsense. Each question forced someone to define authority, liability, cost, or scope. The human team used the answers immediately. When a clause became clearer, they updated their own position instead of pretending ambiguity remained. The hearing kept moving because the treaty was large enough that each clarification touched something else. Federation observers whispered about how long Earth could continue. Some delegates openly predicted withdrawal before dawn. Caroline drank one measured serving of coffee. Aisha logged the time. Then she forced Caroline to eat. Caldrex watched with fascination. "Why carbohydrates?" "Because caffeine doesn't create calories." "You keep saying things as though your ambassador might forget." "She will." Caroline looked over. "I can hear you." Aisha handed her water. "Good drink." Caroline drank. The negotiation continued. She did not become faster. It was the first thing Caldrex noticed. If anything, she became quieter. When an Imperial economist delivered a dense argument about transit tariffs, Caroline listened for 20 minutes without interrupting. Then she asked one narrow question that forced the economist to reveal that one empire had calculated enforcement costs differently from the other two. Nothing collapsed, but the record changed. Near dawn, Aisha ordered a medical recess. Caroline resisted. "I'm fine." "No, I'm functional." "Different word." Caroline glanced at Caldrex as if hoping for support. He found that offensive. Aisha handed her a small sealed cup. Caroline drank it, then walked into the rest room. Caldrex followed Aisha into the monitoring station. She consumed caffeine. "Yes. And now she intends to sleep." "Yes." "Why?" "Timing." Aisha checked the monitor. "She'll get a short nap before the caffeine reaches peak effect." Caldrex stared. "You chemically ambushed your own fatigue." Aisha frowned. "That is not how I would phrase it." "It is accurate." "It is memorable." 23 minutes later, Caroline emerged looking better. She was not rested, only better. The hearing resumed. Bragath noticed too. Caldrex saw the first true irritation in the Chancellor's face. The humans had not escaped fatigue. Caldrex checked the medical feed and saw the numbers beneath the performance. Caroline's reaction time had slowed. Her pulse was elevated. The short sleep had improved alertness without restoring her to baseline. Nothing about the process resembled immunity. It looked more like maintenance performed while a machine was still running. They had scheduled around it. Chapter 7. Caffeine is not sleep. By hour 18, the joke became less funny. Caroline's hands trembled slightly when she lifted her mug. Her speech remained clear, but impatience crept into it. She rubbed her eyes more often. Aisha reduced the next caffeine dose. Caroline objected. "Coffee is not sleep," Aisha said. "Nobody said it was." Aisha glanced at the monitor. "Your bloodstream is making a counter-argument." Caldrex recorded the exchange, not for legal reasons, for himself. Bragath adapted immediately. He introduced a long technical presentation on projected transit rates. The presentation was dense with numbers, variable tariffs, insurance models, and cargo classifications. Caroline followed well at first. Then she misread a figure, small mistake. Caldrex almost missed it. Bragath did not. His eyes sharpened. He pressed the point. Caroline started to answer too quickly. Aisha stood. Medical recess. Caroline looked furious. "I'm in the middle of medical recess." The assembly chair recognized Aisha's authority under the continuous hearing rule. Bragath leaned back. He looked pleased. Caldrex expected Caroline to fight. She did not. She gathered her notes and left. Inside the human room, she turned on Aisha. "You cut me off in front of the chamber." "Yes. I could have fixed it." "You could have made it worse." Caroline's jaw tightened. Aisha did not move. Caldrex stood near the door, suddenly aware he was witnessing something more important than a caffeine dispute. The human technical team rechecked every figure. Caroline slept. Aisha refused additional caffeine until the rest period ended. When Caroline returned to the chamber, she opened by correcting her own mistake. Bragath had prepared to use it against her. She removed the weapon before he could. Then she asked why his tariff model used a shipping estimate that contradicted an earlier imperial projection. The Chancellor answered, correctly, but he no longer looked amused, neither did Caldrex. The humans were tired. Their system expected them to become unreliable, so they had built people into the system whose job was to stop them from pretending otherwise. Chapter 8. The Empires Learn. Bragath stopped treating the hearing as a stunt. The next imperial shift arrived rested. Technical personnel rotated out. A second senior negotiator assumed part of Bragath's burden. One imperial species used legal neural entrainment to shift sleep timing. Another divided authority between paired delegates so one could rest while the other remained active. Caldrex was impressed. The triune block had endured for centuries because it knew how to learn. Bragath also changed the content of the negotiation. He began conceding low-value inspection powers early, forcing Earth to spend less time on symbolic objections and more time on the difficult military command clauses. He split dense financial presentations across rested specialists and instructed each replacement to review Caroline's prior questions before entering the chamber. Several of those changes worked. The effect was immediate. Human fatigue management no longer provided a simple edge. Fresh imperial experts answered faster. They caught weak questions. They corrected earlier ambiguity. At one point, Caroline spent nearly 2 hours pursuing an objection that ultimately strengthened the imperial wording. Bragath smiled. "Thank you, Ambassador." Caroline looked at the revised clause. "Don't get used to it." But Caldrex saw the problem. The empires had adapted. Then Caroline adapted too. She stopped trying to outlast individual specialists. She began testing continuity. A new imperial finance expert took over. Caroline asked him to reconcile a statement made 12 hours earlier by his predecessor. He hesitated, not because he was incompetent, because he had not been there. The archive gave him the words, it did not give him the context. Caroline had both. Her handwritten notes became more elaborate. She marked which promises belonged to which empire, which delegates had softened language, which neutral governments had been reassured by which statements. Fresh imperial personnel brought fresh minds. They also brought gaps. Earth support staff rotated even more aggressively. One human left. Another arrived with a structured brief. Then another. Caroline stayed, not continuously awake, but continuously present. The chamber became a river of people flowing around one increasingly tired human who kept the same notebook throughout. Caldrex began to understand why that mattered. Chapter 9. The second day. Caroline was not awake for 48 continuous hours. That misconception spread anyway. Federation media called her sleepless. She was not. Aisha carved sleep from the hearing wherever procedure allowed. Sometimes Caroline slept for 20 minutes, sometimes 30, and once for 42. It was never enough, but it was something. Light levels changed inside the human preparation room. Meals arrived according to Aisha's schedule, not Caroline's appetite. Temperature was adjusted during rest periods. Caffeine doses became smaller and more deliberate. Caldrex watched the process. There was nothing mystical about it. Caroline became tired anyway. Her reaction time slowed. She occasionally searched for a word. Once she read the same paragraph twice. The humans simply refused to confuse degradation with immediate failure. On the second afternoon, a fresh Imperial delegate argued that one military command clause had already been settled. Caroline flipped through her notes. It was settled under the assumption that emergency command would be shared. The delegate checked the transcript. Yes. Your predecessor later described command as singular during a piracy response. That was contextual. Whose command was singular? The delegate paused. Brogeth intervened smoothly. He reconciled the statements. No crisis, but Caldrex saw the pattern. Each new specialist had to absorb an expanding mountain of prior commitments. Earth's rotating staff did too. The difference was Caroline. She remembered who had said what because she had watched their faces when they said it. That information never appeared in the official transcript. She remembered tone, reluctance, confidence, and avoidance. The humans were turning continuity into a strategic asset. Caldrex realized Caroline's handwritten notes were doing something the automated transcript could not. The transcript preserved words. Caroline preserved commitments as events. Who had needed reassurance, which concession had been reluctant, which answer had been improvised to calm a nervous ally, and which phrase had caused Brogeth to look toward one of the other Imperial delegations before responding. Near the end of the second day, Brogeth approached Caldrex during recess. Your medical exemption appears increasingly relevant. Caldrex stiffened. There is no exemption. Not yet. Brogeth glanced toward the human room. But there will need to be. Caldrex understood too late. The Chancellor had found his counterattack. Chapter 10. The Poisoning Accusation. The formal challenge arrived at the start of the next session. Brogeth presented it without drama. Earth's principal representative is using a prohibited performance-enhancing methylxanthine during a continuous adjudicative hearing. The chamber quieted. Caroline looked at Caldrex, not pleased. The legal chair reviewed the law. Federation rules prohibited controlled stimulants during several classes of formal competition, military evaluation, and adjudicative proceedings unless medically authorized. No one had written the rule with coffee in mind. No one had written it with humans in mind at all. If Caroline's caffeine use violated the statute, her participation could be invalidated. If her participation became invalid, the continuous objection might collapse. Caldrex suddenly mattered to the treaty. He hated that. Brogeth's argument was legitimate. That made Caldrex's decision harder. If the Chancellor had invented a technicality solely to sabotage Earth, Caldrex could have dismissed the maneuver as abuse. Instead, the law genuinely prohibited stimulant use during certain formal proceedings. Caffeine genuinely altered alertness. Caroline genuinely benefited from it. The problem was that the law assumed pharmacology affected every species in roughly the same dangerous direction. Caffeine was prohibited. It altered human alertness. The hearing depended partly on endurance. Caldrex reviewed the original controlled substance language. The intent was clear. The law was meant to prevent dangerous exposure, coercive dosing, and pharmacological manipulation in species for whom the compounds were medically hazardous. Human use fit the wording. It did not fit the underlying toxicology. Caldrex requested Caroline's medical logs. Aisha provided them immediately. The records covered human dose ranges, known risks, Caroline's history of use, monitoring protocols, containment, dedicated waste capture, and the absence of exposure to other delegates. The substance was hazardous to others and medically managed for Caroline. Caldrex returned to the chamber. Brogeth watched him carefully. Caldrex spoke. The prohibition remains valid for all species and contexts currently covered by Federation toxicology guidance. Caroline's expression tightened. Caldrex continued. However, the human use described here is medically tolerated, voluntarily administered, and contained against cross-species exposure. Existing xenopharmacology, law permits species-specific medical authorization when a controlled compound has materially different effects across sapient physiologies. Brogeth said, "You are changing the rules." Caldrex met his eyes. "No, I'm applying the toxicology." The legal chair requested confirmation. Caldrex gave it. For the first time in Federation history, caffeine became legally recognized as both controlled xenotoxin and permitted human consumable. The hearing continued. Caroline lifted her mug toward Caldrex from across the chamber. He was almost certain the gesture was insulting. He found that he did not mind. Chapter 11. The cost of staying at the table. The third day hurt. Caldrex could see it in Caroline before the monitors confirmed it. Her face looked drawn, her speech slowed. She pressed 2 fingers against her temple during long presentations. Aisha checked her resting heart rate, then reduced her caffeine allowance. Caroline argued Aisha won. Without the larger doses, fatigue became more visible. Bragath pressed immediately. He introduced the military security annex. The timing was excellent. Caroline had always been most concerned about imperial basing and enforcement authority. Bragath offered a wording change. On first reading, it looked like a concession. Caroline almost accepted. One of her aides leaned toward her and whispered. Caroline froze. Caldrex saw her reread the clause. The wording would have shifted local emergency authority away from one smaller neutral system whenever imperial forces declared corridor security risk. Caroline had missed it. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then she closed her notebook. Medical recess. Bragath did not smile. He did not need to. Outside the chamber, Caroline sat in silence. Aisha checked her pupils, her pulse, then her cognitive response. Caroline looked furious with herself. I almost took it. Yes, Aisha said. I knew that clause. Yes. I've been tracking that clause for 2 days. Yes. Caroline looked at her. You can stop saying yes. No. Caldrex almost laughed. He did not. When Caroline returned, her method changed. She stopped trying to personally carry every detail. The rotating staff began producing shorter, structured briefs. Each brief fit on 1 page. Current issue, prior promises, known contradiction, risk if accepted, and recommended response. Caroline remained the political decision-maker. She no longer tried to be the entire machine. The human delegation became harder to attack after that. Caroline's near mistake changed the team's behavior more than any speech could have. Her aides stopped giving her raw document stacks. Specialists condensed issues into decision briefs. A second staffer independently checked each recommendation before it reached her. Caroline still made the political choices, but she no longer pretended endurance meant personally carrying every fact. Caroline had not recovered, because the system adapted around her fatigue. Caldrex had spent most of his career thinking survival meant keeping a vulnerable organism away from danger. Humans seemed equally interested in building procedures for the moment danger arrived anyway. Chapter 12. The coalition starts cracking. By the third evening, the hearing had escaped the chamber. Caldrex watched financial updates appear beside the medical feed. Freight contracts were being rewritten in real time. Smaller governments delayed bond issues tied to corridor revenue. Imperial staging fleets consumed fuel and maintenance budgets while waiting for legal authority that might never arrive. Time was no longer merely exhausting the people in the room. It was changing the price of every promise they had made. Shipping markets began reacting to the delay. Nobody knew what tariff structure would exist if the accord passed. Insurance firms increased corridor risk estimates. Military fleets assigned to future enforcement zones remained at staging points. Smaller governments delayed infrastructure spending. The imperial treasuries absorbed costs every hour the treaty remained unresolved. Bragath knew it. So did Caroline. The human support team found the first major fracture by comparing testimony from different sessions. One neutral government had been promised a preferential tariff exemption. Another had been promised what appeared to be the same status. The formulas were not identical. The difference mattered. Caroline introduced both promises into the public record. The chamber became very quiet. Bragath reviewed the documents. He did not deny them. Caldrex respected the answer. Instead, he argued that the exemptions served different commercial conditions. Technically true. Bragath did not collapse under the contradiction. He narrowed one exemption, offered a revenue-sharing amendment, and personally called 2 neutral delegations during recess. One returned to the imperial column. Another did not. Caldrex watched the vote count move in both directions and understood that the humans were not waiting for inevitable victory. They were creating enough time for political costs to become visible. Politically disastrous. The first neutral government demanded clarification. Then the second. By the end of the session, one withdrew support for the treaty. The voting margin narrowed. For the first time, Earth's strategy had changed the outcome rather than merely delaying it. Brogeth responded by offering another concession. A real one, reduced inspection authority in 2 systems. Caroline accepted part of it, rejected the rest. The treaty improved again. The partial concession made the next hours more difficult, not less. Several neutral delegations were willing to stay if their own concerns were resolved. Brogeth still had a path to victory. Caroline still had to keep the hearing alive. Caldrex looked at her across the chamber. She looked exhausted. Her mug sat beside her, empty. Aisha had refused to refill it. The human picked up water instead. The siege continued. Chapter 13. The Coffee Ledger. Caldrex found Aisha's caffeine log by accident. She had left it open on a medical terminal while checking Caroline's pulse. He expected a simple dosing record. Instead, he found pages of monitoring. The log tracked every caffeine dose, administration time, estimated residual level, sleep interval, heart rhythm, blood pressure, tremor, food, hydration, cognitive checks, headache, stomach discomfort, and reasons for refusing further caffeine. Several entries were written in emphatic human capitals. No further caffeine until rest. Caldrex looked at Aisha. You document all of this. For this situation, yes. But humans describe coffee casually. Because casual doesn't mean harmless. Caldrex looked back at the chart. The doses were smaller than he expected and carefully spaced. The humans were not drowning Caroline in stimulant. In fact, Aisha's log contained more refusals than approvals during the final day. Several times, Caroline had requested coffee and received food, water, a dark room, or nothing at all. The human physician treated caffeine as one tool among several, and sometimes as the wrong one. They were using enough to create limited windows of improved alertness while trying not to deepen the damage. You have not mastered the compound. Aisha glanced at him. No. You still experience dependence. Yes. Tolerance. Yes. Side effects. Yes. Then why is your species so comfortable with it? Aisha considered practice. The answer was unsatisfying. Then Caldrex looked again at the log. Of course, the answer was not immunity, but experience. Centuries of ordinary use, millions of individual mistakes, medicine, workplace guidance, emergency practice, cultural rituals, and endless arguments about dosage and whether anyone should be drinking coffee at all. Humans had taken a dangerous tool and surrounded it with habits, some sensible, some less so. But the knowledge existed. The Federation had eliminated caffeine from ordinary life. Humanity had domesticated it. Aisha closed the chart. Caroline gets one more useful dose if we can get her enough sleep first. How much sleep? Enough to make the dose worth something. Caldrex looked toward the chamber clock. The hearing was approaching 80 hours. Brogeth was preparing a consolidated proposal. Chapter 14. Hour 83. At hour 83, Caroline looked exactly like someone who had been negotiating for 3.5 days. Her eyes were red. Her hands were not steady. Her patience had become thin enough that every sentence seemed deliberately measured. Brogeth looked better, not good, but better. The Imperial bloc had rotated personnel effectively, but he, like Caroline, had remained politically central. He was tired, too. The final consolidated proposal appeared. Brogeth presented it calmly. The document absorbed many earlier concessions. Inspection authority narrowed. Tariffs reduced. Some local sovereignty restored. The empires had given ground. But the core military structure remained: permanent imperial access, emergency command, enforcement basing. If Caroline accepted, the hearing would close. If she rejected without new material evidence, the assembly chair could rule Earth's objections exhausted. Aisha called medical recess. Caroline slept. The sleep was short and not enough. Aisha checked her twice before authorizing the final caffeine dose. The final caffeine dose was small and measured. Caroline drank it, then returned to the chamber carrying the sealed mug that had started Caldrex's entire involvement. Brogeth saw it. Despite everything, he smiled. Still drinking your contraband. Caroline sat. Not contraband anymore. A few delegates laughed weakly. Caldrex did not. He saw Caroline open her oldest notebook, not the current brief, the first one. Brogeth began the final summary. Caroline listened. When he finished, she waited. Then she said, I have one material question. The Chancellor's expression sharpened. Proceed. Caroline turned several pages. During the first day, the Karth Dominion delegation assured the Narrow Systems that Karth Command would hold final emergency authority whenever piracy threatened civilian traffic. Brogeth nodded carefully. Caroline continued. On the second day, the Vosic Empire guaranteed its own border governments, that Vosic Command would retain final authority over all military units operating within the corridor. Another page. Yesterday, the REM Compact stated that no joint patrol would operate under foreign command during a declared security emergency. Silence spread through the chamber. Caldrex felt cold. He remembered all three statements. Separately, each had sounded political. Together, they were impossible. Caldrex saw why the contradiction had taken so long to become visible. Each promise had been made to a different audience for a different political reason. Karth wanted its citizens assured that its navy would never take foreign orders. Vosic border systems wanted the same reassurance. Rem had promised sovereignty to governments afraid of imperial command. The treaty could conceal those incompatible expectations while everyone discussed them separately. 83 hours had forced them into the same record. Caroline looked at Brogeth. Which empire lied? The Chancellor did not answer immediately. If he chose Karth authority, Vosic guarantees failed. If he chose Vosic authority, Rem sovereignty failed. If he declared shared command, all three prior assurances became misleading at best. Caroline leaned back. You keep waiting for me to get too tired to remember what you said yesterday. She tapped the notebook. I did. Then she looked toward the imperial delegations. But I wrote it down. Brogeth's expression changed to calculation, not panic. He understood the damage before anyone else. Brogeth understood that too. His eyes moved from Caroline's notebook to the three imperial delegations behind him. The danger was not the human at the table. It was that every concession he now made to one empire would publicly injure another. Coffee had merely helped keep one tired human at the table long enough to discover where it was already cracked. Chapter 15. On their knees. The REM delegation requested private recess. Caroline refused unless the continuous hearing remained active. Brogeth agreed. The recess cost Brogeth another vote, then another. Neutral governments demanded clarification of the conflicting command guarantees. None liked the answers. The treaty lost its majority. For the first time, Brogeth looked genuinely defeated. He looked defeated, not humiliated. The triune bloc could still walk away. But the piracy problem remained. Cargo ships were still being attacked. Insurance still mattered. Navigation coordination still mattered. Earth knew that. Caroline presented a counterproposal: shared anti-piracy patrols, standard navigation rules, joint emergency rescue, limited tariff harmonization, no permanent imperial basing, no unilateral inspection authority, no automatic military jurisdiction. Brogeth rejected the first version. Caroline expected that. He demanded stronger enforcement authority. She gave him some. He demanded faster emergency response provisions. Agreed. He wanted a tariff mechanism that actually funded patrols. Earth's economists revised the structure. The replacement agreement took another 5 hours because nobody trusted easy language anymore. The smaller systems demanded explicit limits on emergency command. The empires demanded funding mechanisms that would actually sustain patrols. Earth accepted stronger inspection powers in narrow piracy cases, while Brogeth surrendered permanent basing and unilateral jurisdiction. The document that survived was less elegant than the imperial proposal and much harder for any one government to abuse. The bargaining became hard again, real again. Nobody pretended the empires had no legitimate concerns. Hours later, the final document appeared. Caldrex watched all three imperial delegations sign, then the smaller systems, then Earth. Caroline added her signature last. Her signing hand shook slightly. The mug beside her carried 4 hazard symbols and a Federation authorization seal. 3 ancient empires had entered the summit expecting ratification of their own accord. They left with a compromise they could live with and far less control than they wanted. Caldrex looked at Caroline. She was too tired to celebrate. Aisha was already approaching. Bed. Caroline looked toward the signed treaty. 5 minutes. Now. Caroline stood. Fine. Caldrex almost objected to the abruptness. Then he remembered the medical log. He stepped aside. The siege was over. Caroline had remained the principal representative for nearly 4 days, but the final treaty had been produced by hundreds of rotating human hours around her. Lawyers, economists, medical staff, analysts, translators, aides, and negotiators had carried pieces of the process whenever she could not. Caldrex finally understood why Earth had kept functioning after its central diplomats stopped being able to function perfectly. This time, the physician won. Chapter 16. Species-specific. The caffeine rules changed within 3 months. The rules did not change completely. Caldrex would not have approved that. For species sensitive to methylxanthines, the restrictions remained severe. Human use became legal in designated controlled environments. Packaging standards changed. Coffee waste received cross-species hazard handling requirements. Embassy beverage systems used segregated plumbing. Hospitality staff received new training. Every human coffee station inside Federation space acquired warnings that made it look like a reactor maintenance access point. Humans found this hilarious. Caldrex did not. At least not at first. Diplomatic academies changed too. New endurance guidance warned negotiators against assuming that human willingness to continue a meeting meant humans were not tired. The wording mattered. Humans did become tired. Caroline had nearly made a catastrophic mistake during the 3rd day. The hearing succeeded partly because she eventually stopped pretending she could carry everything herself. Bragath learned too. At their next summit, he also distributed institutional memory differently. Each replacement negotiator entered with a continuity officer whose only job was to track earlier commitments. He did not try to copy the human method exactly. He adapted the lesson to his own delegation, which made him more dangerous than before. He survived politically. At his next negotiation with Earth, he arrived with 2 complete backup teams, a revised continuity archive, and a mandatory sleep agreement written into the summit schedule. Caroline approved immediately. Caldrex found that strangely satisfying. The best evidence that Bragath remained dangerous was that he had learned. So had the Federation. And so had Caldrex. He still considered caffeine hazardous. He simply stopped believing that hazard belonged to the molecule alone. Epilogue. Tuesday. Months later, Caldrex visited the human embassy. A new sign hung above the beverage station. Caffeinated beverages. Human food. Federation xenobiological, restricted handling. The coffee machine had its own sealed waste line. Caldrex approved. Caroline Pendergast stood beneath the sign filling a mug. He stopped a safe distance away. You have another treaty summit. No. A crisis. No. A prolonged arbitration. Caroline shook her head. Caldrex looked at the mug. Then why are you consuming it? She took a sip. Budget meeting. He waited. That requires neural stimulation. Caroline considered the question. It's Tuesday.